say Manchester United have been inconsistent this season would be something of an understatement. Despite his best efforts, Erik Ten Hag has struggled to convince fans and critics alike that he's the man to take the Old Trafford club forward and back to the top of the Premier League table. And yet, there is still a lingering thought in the back of my head that suggests that the Dutch tactician may still be the answer to Man United's problems, and I'll try to explain why. Ten Hag strikes me as one of the most fascinating managers in European football today. Unlike so many of his peers at other super clubs around the continent, the Dutch tactician is not only battling to get his team back into the Premier League top four, but is also constantly pushing back against the club's own tendencies from one transfer window to the next. At Old Trafford these days, there seems to be this really intriguing dichotomy between what the club does off the pitch and what their manager is trying to do on it. Signed from Ajax in April 2022, Ten Hag was heralded as a great reformer that would be able to implement a long-term vision for Man United and guide the club to the sort of success enjoyed by their domestic rivals in recent years. Liverpool had Jurgen Klopp, Man City had Pep Guardiola, and even Arsenal were beginning to look like a genuine threat under the stewardship of Mikel Arteta. In no uncertain terms, Man United were playing catch-up, but also hoped to leapfrog these clubs and re-establish themselves as English football's dominant force. That, however, hasn't exactly worked out. Since taking over the reins at Old Trafford, Ten Hag has won 123 points in the Premier League, which places him comfortably in fourth place behind the aforementioned trio. Ahead of the rest of the chasing pack, and good enough for regular Champions League qualification, perhaps, but 11 points behind Klopp, 26 behind Arteta, and a rather daunting 30 behind Guardiola. If that's the pace Ten Hag is trying to match, he's not doing a very good job of it. This is perhaps where that aforementioned dichotomy at Man United comes into play. It seems to get in the way of the club keeping up with their rivals. Debates over Ten Hag's ability as a manager and tactician are undoubtedly important, but they're just as potent as they are unanswerable at this moment in time. And for the sake of this discussion, I'm far more interested in comparing the situation the Man United manager is in with the rivals he has been tasked with matching, and most importantly, whether Ten Hag is being held back by his own club's inability to help him build a proper team capable of competing in the Premier League. One of the most striking aspects of Ten Hag's time at Man United, and where fans of the club are most willing to give him credit, is in the manner in which the manager has awarded game time to younger players in the squad. In just 2 seasons at the club, Ten Hag has awarded debuts or cemented first-team spots for Facundo Pellistri, Willy Kambwala, Hannibal, and most notably Kobe Mainu and Alejandro Garnacho. In fact, such has been Ten Hag's tendency to call up youth players from Man United's academy that the club can lay claim to 8 former academy players in their first-team squad this season, and that's the second best record in the Premier League behind only Liverpool. That shouldn't really be a huge surprise when we consider Ten Hag's background as a manager before he arrived in Manchester. Prior to being a youth coach at Bayern Munich, Ten Hag made his name at Ajax by not only building a squad that won the league title in 3 of the 6 seasons at the club, but also one that was pretty dependent on young players. In fact, over the course of his 6 seasons in the Eredivisie, Ten Hag's side were on average the 4th or 5th youngest team in the top flight. Very rarely signed players over the age of 28. Of course, this isn't entirely unnatural for Ajax, who are famed for rearing young players and turning them into international stars, but it is important to note when we then compare Ten Hag's success in the Netherlands to his struggles in England. Indeed, in his 6 years at Ajax, the club signed only 5 players over the age of 28 for a combined total of €19.2 million. In the last 2 seasons alone, Man United have spent over €75 million bringing in just as many players, 28 or over, to the Old Trafford club. And not only is that out of step with what Ten Hag was used to at Ajax, but also stands in stark contrast to how their Premier League rivals scout and sign players in the transfer window. For example, if we take a look at the average age of Arsenal's signings since Arteta joined the club, we can see that it would sometimes rise to 25 or 26, but over the course of the last 5 seasons it has stood at an average of 23.97. Similarly, when we consider the last 9 seasons at Liverpool under Klopp, the Anfield club have also followed a similar strategy of signing players in their early 20s, with the odd exception to cover holes in the team. As such, the average age of Liverpool's signings since Klopp arrived stands at an even lower 23.07. This, perhaps to no great surprise, is a little different to Man United's current strategy. Since Ten Hag joined the club, the average age of their new signings stands at a notably higher 25.95. And in the 5 years prior to Ten Hag's appointment, the club's average age of new signings stood at an equally troubling 25.93, with the average age of the new signings in the season before Ten Hag joined standing at a rather staggering 30.0. This hopefully goes some way to illustrating where Man United differ from Arsenal and Liverpool, where the Old Trafford club have continued wasting money on ready-made senior players that haven't lived up to the billing. The rivals have gutted their squad and built impressive teams around new players. If Man United want to emulate that, they'll need to change their tactics in the transfer window. And fortunately for them, they may already have a manager that is capable of such a job, and indeed wants to do exactly that. Despite the older players signed by Man United in recent years, Ten Hag's starting 11 has begun to drop in average age quite dramatically. In the 22-23 season, his 11 most used players had an average age of 28.2. This time around, that figure has dropped by 6% down to 26.6, which is impressive when we consider that 36-year-old Johnny Evans has had to cover for the 26-year-old Lisandro Martinez in the heart of defence for much of the season. Based on my own estimations, should the club avoid any serious injuries next season, Ten Hag's preferred 11 could drop even further down to 25.6. Indeed, if Ten Hag was to get his way, it's not hard to imagine Martinez stepping back in for Evans, Manu taking the place of the aging Casemiro in the middle of the park, and a frontline built around Garnacho and 21-year-old Rasmus Højlund to create the foundations for a good team going forward. The question is whether Man United will let him do exactly that. Before Klopp was able to build his new-look team at Anfield, he had to make difficult calls in moving on aging stars like Martin Skrtel and Daniel Sturridge. Arteta, quite dramatically, had to draw a line under the Arsenal careers of big earners like Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang and Mesut Ozil before he was able to build a team capable of challenging for the Premier League. And it's not hard to envisage Ten Hag having equally difficult conversations with Raphael Varane, Harry Maguire, Christian Eriksen, and perhaps even Marcus Rashford. But the Dutch tactician can only do that if he is given the backing of the club to prepare long-term plans for the squad's future. Whether such a scenario will come to fruition, and indeed whether Ten Hag will still have a job at Old Trafford next season, will probably be down to the new part owner, Sir Jim Ratcliffe. Man United have thrown good money after bad in signing old players over the course of the last 10 years, and with that has come a carousel of managers that have failed to make sense of squads pieced together by accountants rather than scouts or head coaches. The Old Trafford club may now have an opportunity to break away from that troubled cycle, but it would require Ratcliffe to put his trust in Ten Hag, and to let the Dutch manager finally do what Man United hired him to do in the first place.